This video discusses very heavy topics. Only those of the age of 18 should watch this. Viewer discretion is advised.
What is amorality?
So before we continue, I want to explain that a lot of what I'm doing is presenting a lot of seemingly disparate or separate points, kind of like a collage of points, with the intent of creating a very nuanced and full picture of what I'm trying to describe. It might seem a bit random or unrelated to the topic at hand, but if you stick by and let all the separate pieces come together, it will make sense. Also, having to work around YouTube's censorship sucks.
It's not just bad art makes bad people. It's that powerful art changes state. It immerses you in a mood, a world, a way of seeing. Most people integrate that. They feel it deeply, but they don't act destructively. A vulnerable minority get consumed by it. If someone's already unstable, suggestible, or looking for a script, the art can serve as a spark. That's why you're feeling the phenomenology so strongly, the it's so itself thing. It's like an artwork that's pure atmosphere can short-circuit the distance between fiction and lived experience. It feels like more than art. What's fascinating is that the same intensity that makes art dangerous can also inspire incredible beauty, compassion, and even heroism. A novel can cause self or spark revolutions. A song can inspire despair or give someone the courage to keep going. So it's less about art being bad and more about art being charged and what the listener viewer brings into that charge. Art as orientation. Every artwork points somewhere. It has a tone, a drive, a towardsness, hope, despair, irony, transcendence, rage. Even when it's ambiguous, that's still a kind of orientation. Guardrails. Most art, even if it's dark, carries some implicit guardrail, some justification, some beauty, some structure that keeps it from collapsing into pure chaos. A game justifies by saying you're the hero. A tragic novel justifies despair by offering catharsis. What shook you about a video game I don't recommend you looking up? It lacks those guardrails. It's not conflict for justice or conflict for beauty or conflict for catharsis. It's violence because violence. Purely negative orientation. And you felt how rare that is, how exposed it makes the player because there's no narrative safety net. The paradox you're circling. In life, the same thing happens. Most of us live inside guardrails of meaning. Religion, morality, community, art, even everyday habits. They keep the chaos in check. But the raw fact is, there aren't actually any guardrails built into reality. We make them. Reality itself will let you drift into despair, ecstasy, indifference, cruelty, creativity. It doesn't care. So when you say life doesn't actually have guardrails, you're seeing the naked core. That the safety and orientation we usually experience are human constructs, not universal truths. That's both terrifying and liberating. How does a violent video game pertain to amorality and not just plain old immorality? We'll get there. Violence for violence. When I say violence because violence, I mean no higher justification, such as justice, survival, protection, no aesthetic sublimation, beauty in tragedy, grace in choreography, no catharsis, release of tension, emotional cleansing, no irony, no satire, no parody, it just is. Violence as its own end. That's what makes something like Hunt so uniquely horrifying. It withholds all the normal excuses or frames we use to digest brutality. I know what I'm talking about isn't actually that edgy, like it's just words, but I'm trying to get past YouTube's filters and reach as many people as possible without triggering censorship. So, why it's rare. Most art avoids pure negativity for several intertwined reasons. The human impulse for meaning. Artists are humans too. Most can't resist embedding their work with some orientation, moral, emotional, spiritual. Even when they explore darkness, they usually aim to reveal something, not just wallow. Audience endurance. Pure negativity is extremely hard to stay with. People can watch tragedy, horror, gore, even nihilism if it's framed with beauty, humor, or moral ambiguity. Strip those away and audiences recoil. That limits demand and distribution. Market and censorship. Historically, societies suppress works they perceive as corruptive or gratuitously malevolent. Example, censorship of A Clockwork Orange or Werther bands. That further filters out art with no guardrails. Catharsis is deeply wired. Since Aristotle, people have instinctively used art for catharsis to purge emotions safely. Purely negative art denies that payoff. It doesn't resolve, redeem, or even soothe. That makes it feel unfinished or unbearable. And yet, I think there's a paradox at the heart of censorship and art. On one hand, restricting what people can say or show can keep society running smoothly, like a band-aid solution. It prevents conflict and shields people who might not be ready for certain ideas. But on the other hand, When you silence someone completely, you never really understand them. The same applies to art. If a piece is censored for being too negative, then we lose the chance to understand the perspective behind it. That's why I think there's value in even allowing art that seems to glorify darkness or violence, not because we want to promote these things, but because only by letting them fully express themselves can we examine, critique, and ultimately learn from them. This comes with a huge condition. It requires the audience to have the maturity and moral backbone to see the work, process it, and not imitate it. For some people, even adults, that can be too much. They may internalize it in unhealthy ways. So it's dangerous, absolutely. Yeah, I believe the world is poorer when such expression is forbidden entirely. It's a difficult balance. Freedom of expression versus the risk of influence. But without that freedom, we can't confront or truly understand the darker corners of human thought and creativity, and by extension, the human soul. Anyway, what happens when it shows up? When something does cross that threshold, when it refuses to orient positively at all, it feels uncanny because it mirrors the indifference of raw reality where things happen without reason, threatening because it withholds the guardrails we rely on to metabolize experience, hypnotic because it's rare. We recognize a forbidden zone, the void inside creation. That's why MH 2003 hits you harder than Call of Duty, or even most horror films. It doesn't give you a because. The murders aren't for country or for art or for catharsis. They're just murders. The void stares back. The deeper horror is in the core itself. It's the recognition that reality can be like this, that things can happen without purpose, without frame, without beauty, without redemption. That's rare in art precisely because art is usually where we protect ourselves from that rawness. Pure negative orientation is art's way of pulling away the veil and saying, what if there really are no guardrails? What if this is all there is? So the rareness comes from a kind of conspiracy of survival. Both artists and audience usually need some form of sense-making. Pure negativity denies that, and so it shocks, not because it's more violent, but because it's more indifferent. Why is this so dangerous? Because not everyone has the psychological scaffolding to survive that confrontation. Some can metabolize it and oddly feel stronger or clearer afterward. Others can get trapped in it, spiraling into despair, nihilism, or even obsession. That's why this kind of art remains rare. It's like radioactive material. It can illuminate truth, but it can also poison. Why the immorality is fascinating. It collapses the moral frame. Most of the time, we're guided by invisible handrails of right and wrong, justice and evil. When those vanish, reality feels alien, uncanny, even surreal. It feels transgressive. Just knowing this shouldn't exist charges it with forbidden energy. It makes you look twice. It's the theater of the unthinkable. You can't imagine doing it yourself, but seeing it staged as art lets you confront that what if safely, like peeking into an abyss without falling. It exposes human fear. The outrage people have about these works is itself revealing. It shows how fragile our reliance on moral guardrails really is. What it does psychologically. Pure negativity produces an effect most art avoids: existential nausea. You're not horrified at what happens, but at the fact that it happens for nothing. It collapses the illusion that everything must have a reason. It leaves you with the raw, vertiginous sense of a world that doesn't care, a glimpse of cosmic indifference. That's why it's so rare. Most art either fights against indifference by injecting meaning or dances around it using irony, satire, and catharsis. Pure negative orientation just shows you the void. The atmosphere of amorality. It's not just gore or cruelty, it's a vibe. You feel it in the air like a wrongness, a deliberate break from the rules of being human. That's why Manhunt feels more suffocating than Call of Duty. COD is violence with a cause. Manhunt is violence stripped of all cause. The unease isn't in the blood, but in the pointlessness. That's the real horror. The paradox. This is the punchline. Immoral art doesn't spread immorality to everyone. What it does is make visible how fragile morality itself is, that it's a construct, not a guarantee, and that's what you're sensing. The fascination is not with it's with the void where morality should be. It's rare in art, but when it shows up, it's electrifying because it pulls back the curtain on something that polite society usually refuses to admit, that morality is optional. Why artists rarely do it? It risks alienating everyone. People often walk away thinking, why did I watch this? What was the point? That's lethal commercially and socially. Artists are meaning-seeking animals. Even when exploring horror, they usually want to say something. Pure negativity resists even that. It courts danger. As you've already noticed with Manhunt, in the wrong hands, it can destabilize impressionable people. Yeah, that's a real one. Basically, there was a real life killing that was inspired. Some young kid got it in his mind to kill one of his own friends, and he blamed the game. So for the sake of clarity, what is the difference between morality, immorality, and amorality? Honestly, you should know what morality is. If I have to look it up, principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong or good and bad behavior. Done. For the sake of getting a clearer idea of what amorality is, I'm going to be using immorality. Immoral, acting against a moral standard or code. Implication, that there is a moral framework and the action violates it. Example, stealing, murdering for personal gain, lying to hurt someone. In media, immoral art often depicts characters doing morally wrong things, but usually with some narrative or emotional framing. You feel the tension between what is right and what the characters do. Key point, immorality assumes there is a moral framework that is being broken. Amoral. Definition, outside or indifferent to morality, not considering morality at all. Implication, no moral standard is acknowledged or enforced. Example, a natural disaster, killing thousands, a virus spreading, or a character who acts without regard for right or wrong. In media, amoral works don't judge their characters or events. They present them as is, leaving the audience to grapple with them. Manhunt is more amoral than immoral, because it doesn't justify the violence with moral reasoning, but simply depicts it. Key point, immorality ignores morality entirely. It doesn't break the rules, it acts as if there are no rules. To be clear, immorality is reactive. It exists because rules exist. Immorality is always a response to an established framework of what's right and wrong. It's bounded. It can be shocking, transgressive, or exciting, but is limited by culture, experience, and understanding. It's predictable in a way. Once society understands certain behaviors, rules, and laws codify them. Immorality loses novelty because it's always measured against what's already known to be wrong. Amorality is pre-cultural. Truly amoral acts exist outside the moral framework. The actor does not recognize any rules. There is no calculation or comprehension of right or wrong. Primal and disturbing. This is why it's terrifying. Amorality is pre-moral, like a raw, undomesticated force. It's unbounded. There's nothing to anchor it, nothing to anticipate. Its malevolence or destructiveness is not transgression. It's an emergence from a place with no concept of rules at all. Why this is the deepest negative premise. Immorality can be rationalized, contained, or understood. People can react, punish, educate, or contain it. Amorality resists understanding because it doesn't operate on shared assumptions. It's not about defiance, it's about pure indifference or ignorance of moral structure. This is what makes it existentially disturbing. It bypasses all of society's tools for managing wrongness, leaving a kind of raw, unprocessed danger. This is why transgressive artists or writers sometimes aim for amorality. It's not enough to shock by rebelling. The true power comes from depicting a world or characters that operate entirely outside of moral recognition. It creates a mirror for our own fragility, showing that morality is contingent, constructed, and can be entirely absent in experience. The aesthetics of amorality. Why that moment feels spectacular. Unrestrained, maximum effort. As you said, when people act without the ballast of precedent or rules, the raw force of human intent comes through. Whether to build or destroy, it's maximal. That's why it's so aesthetically powerful. Singularity. It can only really happen once. After that, people know. They can imitate, they can rebel, they can moralize, but the next time it's already defined. The initial eruption was amoral. Everything after is moralized as good, evil, justified, or condemned. Civilization paradox. What makes it chilling is when it comes from a place that should know better, like Germany in the 1930s. It wasn't barbarism, it was civilization weaponized, and because it was the first time on that scale, it unfolded with almost no sense of limit. Aesthetic distinction. World War II versus today. This also explains the contrast you feel between World War II and, say, the rise of American authoritarianism now. World War II had the aesthetic advantage in your terms of being unprecedented. The world hadn't seen mechanized genocide, global-scale fascism, or the atomic bomb before. It was horrifying, but maximal. What's happening now feels uglier, smaller, because it's derivative. There's no ignorance here. We've seen it before. The people reviving it are doing so in bad faith, not in amoral naivety. That's why it feels stupid, repetitious, stripped of the terrible sublimity of the unprecedented. Why this matters aesthetically? You're essentially tracking the aesthetic intensity of history. Amoral is sublime, unprecedented, maximal, terrifyingly beautiful, or horrifying. Immoral is repetitive, derivative, constrained by already known categories. Amorality is like a rupture in the world picture. Immorality is just playing with already defined pieces. That's why the first explosion shocks the psyche forever, and the rest only echo it. Allow me to explain. The shock of the unprecedented. When something amoral happens, an act or event that hasn't yet been given a place in our moral or cultural map, it has a rawness to it. Cognitive rupture. You can't file it under right or wrong immediately. It just is. The brain scrambles. What category is this? What am I seeing? That confusion is part of its power. Sublimity, because it doesn't yet have rules attached, it can feel limitless. The sheer force of human will, all suffering, all creation hits unfiltered. That's why people often describe such moments as both horrifying and awe-inspiring. Being inside versus outside. Inside it, the actor. To act amoral is to have no sense that you're crossing a line. It feels like following necessity, destiny, inevitability. No breaks, no guilt, pure execution. That's why it can unleash such maximal energy. Restraint doesn't even occur. Outside it, the witness. To see something amoral is to feel destabilized because you realize the categories I thought governed reality don't work here. It's uncanny, like looking into the void. It produces fear, fascination, and sometimes even admiration, depending on how the energy manifests. The flattening effect of repetition. Once the act has happened, the spell breaks. It's named atrocity, crime, evil, genius. It's studied and codified, never again, outlawed, forbidden. It's imitated, but imitation always feels smaller, derivative, ugly, because now it comes with awareness. The second time around, the actor knows that they are rebelling, transgressing, being bad. That's immorality, conscious violation. And for the witness, it's less shocking because the categories are already in place. Why it grips you aesthetically. You're tuned into the moment when categories collapse. That collapse is frightening, but also fertile, because art, like atrocity, draws its intensity from breaking through what's supposed to be. The amoral moment is like a volcanic eruption of possibility. Afterward, society rushes to build guardrails, morality, law, genre, convention. But in the flash before the guardrails exist, something utterly raw comes into being. That's why it feels spectacular even when horrifying. It's the spectacle of unbounded human force prior to judgment. The core principle. When something is unprecedented, there's no moral script yet. People or players or witnesses are thrust into an amoral space where meaning hasn't been constructed. That's why it feels shocking, disturbing, and spectacular. The human effort or the event occurs at full force before society has learned how to categorize, limit, or contextualize it. Spectrum of unprecedented amorality. Dark, negative pole. These examples are shocked because they broke precedent in destructive or horrifying ways. On 2003, first mainstream game where you're rewarded for executions with no hero context. 9/11, 2001, unprecedented scale of symbolic terrorism. No moral script existed in the moment. World War II, the Holocaust, Hiroshima, required entirely new moral categories. Genocide, crimes against humanity. Oh man, this is heavy. Columbine, 1999, the archetype of the modern school. Light, positive pole. These examples shocked because they broke precedent in creative, luminous ways. The moon landing, 1969. First humans on another world. Or before language caught up. The internet, early 1990s. Unregulated, frontier-like, amoral space of boundless new connection. Picasso's Cubism, 1907. Fractured, visual perspective. Audiences had no script to process it. Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, 1913. A musical riot. Listeners didn't yet have categories for the sound. First heart transplant, 1967. Miracle and horror fused. Society struggled to frame it. Effect. Spectacle of wonder, astonishment, expanded horizons, middle ambiguous pole. Some breakthroughs carry both horror and awe simultaneously. Splitting the atom, 1945, both Hiroshima and nuclear energy. AI, now. Unprecedented capacity, no moral script fully in place yet. Social media, 2000s, new amoral frontier for human connection and manipulation. Effect. Fascination, unease, possibility. The pattern. Phase 1, shock, amoral. What the fuck is this? No precedent exists. Phase 2, naming, moral, immoral. Society creates rules, categories, laws, aesthetics. Phase 3, imitation, which is derivative. Later versions can be scary, beautiful, or powerful, but never as raw as the first rupture. That's why Manhunt hits harder than Outlast. Why 9/11 hits harder than later terror attacks. why the Rite of Spring caused riots, but now plays in opera houses. True unprecedentedness is a one-time rupture that feels spectacular, whether in horror or beauty, precisely because morality hasn't yet arrived to filter it. In conclusion, I do not condone violence or harm of any kind in real life. What I'm doing here is exploring the fine line between morality and immorality in order to understand what I call amorality, ideally in its positive, reflective form. Artistically, I see value in even the darker sides of amorality, but only in the realm of aesthetic and creative expression. Sometimes, paradoxically, to truly understand why people are drawn to negativity, you have to let it be expressed in art, even if it appears to glorify it. This doesn't mean endorsing those ideas, it means giving space to examine them, to see what they reveal about human nature, and to build the maturity to face them without being consumed by them. At the same time, I recognize how delicate this territory is. History shows us the real harm that violence, hatred, or extremism has caused, and any art that engages with those themes must do so with nuance, responsibility, and respect for the people who were affected. So while I don't support amorality or immorality in practice, I do see artistic exploration of them as valuable, because only by looking directly at what unsettles us can we begin to understand ourselves more fully.